Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 270. Tianyan Pavilion. Punishment will be imposed. 3 days passed quickly. At dawn on the third day, Shimei came by the door to the secret room. Taxian Jun was already fully equipped. He was still wearing his black battle armor. On his thin waist, there was a hidden weapon box that shone with a silver light. His legs were long and slender, his shoulders were broad and straight. He wore dragon scale leather gloves on his hands. He raised his eyes and said coldly, "You're here. Get ready. We're going to the Tianyan Pavilion. No need for more preparation. Let's go." Shimei looked at him and asked, "What about Chu Wanning?" This venerable one fed him medicine and put him to sleep. Shimei nodded. But just in case, he entered the secret room with Taxian Jun again. After checking Chu Wanning's pulse, Shimei said, "His spiritual energy will be fully recovered in a few days. We have to be careful." Taxian Jun was not afraid of Chu Wanning's battle strength. He asked, "What about his memory?" Shimei glanced at him and said, "Same." Ignoring the displeasure on Taxian Jun's face, Shimei got up and set up a sleeping incense array in the secret room to ensure that Chu Wanning would not wake up suddenly and ruin his plan. Finally, when he was about to leave, he cast a high-level barrier spell on the door. Taxian Jun frowned and said, "Why did you put this spell? There is no one else in this mountain. Nangonglu is just a little brat. No one can go in and save him." Shimei's expression did not change. He said lightly, "It's hard to guard against a thief if they're within the family." "Who? You don't know him?" Shimei sighed, "It's someone close to me. Let's not talk about it. Let's go." The two of them left. In the cold stone room, Chu Wanning was left behind. He was still in a coma. The memories of the two lives were still settling within him. However, even Shimei didn't realize that the reason why Chu Wanning hadn't fully recovered his memories and consciousness after such a long time wasn't only because of his poor physical condition. There was another important reason. The memories that were yet to settle was not only his own memories of 2 lifetimes. Perhaps it was because the other half of his earth soul had stayed in Moran's body for a long time, entangling with Moran's soul all those while. When the earth soul returned, it actually brought back some memories from the depths of Moran's soul. At this very moment, these memories were the final images that surged into his mind. He was dreaming, and what he dreamt of were fragments of the past. He first dreamt of a mass grave. A child with unkempt hair and a dirty face was crying on top of a rotting female corpse. His eyes were blurred with tears. "Mother! Mother! Is anyone here? Is there anyone? Bury me too. Bury me together with my mother." Then he dreamt of Jade Wine House. Moran was beaten black and blue all over. He was curled up in a dog cage. In the warm room with a pungent smell, the child was locked in the cage. He didn't have anything to eat or drink. He couldn't even turn around. A child of the same age as him grinned and laughed at him. "Why don't you take a look at yourself? You want to be a hero? I think you're just a joke. Bah! You'll be a joke for the rest of your life." He spat at him. Little Moran closed his eyes. Chu Wanning's eyelashes were also trembling. Moran. Then, he dreamt that the blazing tongues of fire were like hanging ghosts wandering around the building, twisting and dancing eerily. There were cries everywhere. Burning pillars collapsed. Some people were screaming. Thick smoke billowed. The young man, Moran, sat in the midst of the flames. His face was extremely cold and his eyes were calm. He lowered his head and placed a blood-stained knife on his knee. He held a bunch of grapes in his hand and was slowly peeling off the purple skin. "It's all over, mother." Moran seemed very peaceful. "But I won't be able to see you. I killed someone. My hands are covered in blood. Mother, I'll go to hell after I die. I won't be able to see you again. Mo ran. Mo ran. Suddenly there was a light in front of him. It was a woman's gentle face. The ends of her eyes were slightly raised. Who was it? Chu Wanning felt that the woman's eyebrows were somewhat similar to his. His resemblance to her was even more obvious when she lowered her head and worked seriously. She was carefully sewing the rough clothes in her hands. Mother. There was a child's voice, as soft as a mosquito's. The woman heard the voice and looked up. She smiled at him. Why are you awake? I had a nightmare. I'm so hungry. The woman put down the clothes and opened her arms. She smiled gently and said, Nightmare again? All right, don't be afraid. Ran air, come to mother's arms. Ran air. Mo ran. Chu Wanning closed his eyes, his heart was filled with an indescribable bitterness. It was too bitter. Just by looking at it, he felt that these days were dry and wrinkled. Every day and night were so unbearable. Mother. This was the first time he saw the appearance of Mo Ran's mother. He suddenly understood why little Mo Ran instinctively grabbed his robe outside of Wuobei Temple, begged him and believed in him. He also suddenly understood why the youth would walk over to him in front of sky-reaching pagoda and persistently begged him to take him as a disciple. The youth smiled brightly and said, Because you look the most beautiful and gentle. At that time, everyone laughed behind his back at Mo Ran for being blind and mocked Mo Ran for being a flatterer. Actually, it wasn't like that. It wasn't. He wasn't blind, nor was he simply fawning on him. He just couldn't tell the truth, nor could he cry out. He couldn't pull Chu Wanning and say, Master, when you lower your head, you actually look like the person who used to treat me the best in this world. She's no longer here. Can you please pay attention to me? Can you replace her and look after me one more time? I miss her so much. Mo Ran couldn't say any of that. He could only endure the great bitterness in his heart and endure the tears that welled up. Endure Chu Wanning's indifference and neglect. Chase behind and pretend to be calm and laugh it off, deceiving everyone. No one could know of his past. No one could share his pain. He could only smile brightly. Under the sky-reaching pagoda, that smile was too warm, too eager and hid endless thoughts. Just like that, it burned Chu Wanning. Mo Ran opened his eyes. He was no longer at Shisheng Peak. He was in an extremely narrow prison cell. The walls here were gray and the only light came from a small opening under the black iron door where the food was being delivered. The top of the cell was engraved with the emblem of a weight. He knew that he was already in prison. This was the world's most impartial judgment temple, independent of the top 10 sects in the cultivation world. The Tianyan Pavilion. He was lying inside, his throat burning and his lips chapped. The surroundings were very quiet. It was so quiet that he could hear the empty sound of the wind in his ears and hear the ravings of the spirits. It took a long time for him to gather his scattered thoughts. He actually felt that this day should have come in his previous life, but fate was kind to him. It let him lead an ignoble life for 2 lifetimes and only in this life when he was made to pay for his sins. Mo Ran, it's time to eat. He didn't know how long he had been lying there. Inside here, time was a blur. He heard someone come over and push food to him through the hole. There was a slice of cake and a bowl of soup. He didn't get up to receive it. The attendant of the Tianyan Pavilion didn't speak to him again. He walked away quickly. How was Chu Wanning? How was the Shisheng Peak? Where did the destroyed Zhenlong chess pieces go in the end? He was in a daze, thinking about these 3 questions tiredly. He thought for a long time before he resigned himself to the fact that no one would tell him the answer. He was now a prisoner. He sat up. His chest hurt and he didn't have any strength in his body. The spiritual energy that used to be flowing turbulently had disappeared. He leaned against the wall in a daze for a while. It turned out that this was the feeling after one's spiritual core got shattered. He couldn't summon his holy weapon, nor could he use spells. It was like the kun that rode the wind and waves had lost its tail, or the peng that flew through the clouds had lost its wings. He curled up in the corner, staring blankly ahead with his black eyes. Mo Ran suddenly felt very sad, but it wasn't because of himself. He thought of Chu Wanning in his previous life. He finally understood Chu Wanning's helplessness and pain. He really wanted to apologize to Chu Wanning at that time. But it was too late. He couldn't turn back anymore. He was trapped in the room, and the cake and bowl of soup went from hot to cold, and then from cold to frosty. Later, he started to eat. After eating this little bit of food, no one came to his prison cell again. He was once again the Mo Ran who was locked up in a dog cage as a child. Though this room was much better than when he was locked in a dog cage. He could actually lie down comfortably in this room. He just lay in the darkness, waking and sleeping. But waking and sleeping weren't that important. In this room, he seemed to be dead. Mo Ran groggily thought to himself, perhaps he is already dead. Maybe this life was a good dream that he had while lying in the coffin under the sky-reaching pagoda, and it's just that his soul hadn't dispersed yet. The 32 years of his life flashed in front of him like a horse race show, colorful and joyful, angry and sad. In the end, they would all become bones in the grave. He curled up the corners of his mouth slightly, forming a smile. He felt that if this was the truth, then it couldn't be better. He was very tired. He had walked for too long and struggled for too long. Whether it was hell or the human world, he didn't care. He just wanted to rest. His heart felt very old. The fact was, he had already completely collapsed and aged from the moment Chu Wanning died. All these years, he had been doing good, trying to make up for everything. He had been looking for a medicine that could cure this aging. But he couldn't find it. He had fought for so long, brazenly and shamelessly for so long. Now, he was tired of fighting and begging. In this life, he had lost his mother, his Shizun, his best friend, his lover, the family he had stolen, and his illusionary reputation. Now, he had even lost his spiritual core as well. But he was still taken to the Tianyan Pavilion and was still unable to escape the harshest censure in the cultivation world. He finally gave up. He knew that he would never be forgiven. He, Mo Weiyu, was an ugly and deformed ruined mountain. The vast winter snow covered his scars. But the snow had melted. Whether it was his darkness or his terror, there was nowhere to hide them anymore. He couldn't be Grandmaster Mo. From the moment he was first stained with the blood of an innocent person, he was destined to only be Taxian Jun. He burned the chin and cooked the crane. He ground his teeth and drank blood. He was ferocious. He was worse than a beast. He deserved to die. When he died, the world would cheer. He didn't know how many days had passed since he was kept in this prison when the door opened. The disciples of the Tianyan Pavilion came in. Without a word, they tied him up with the immortal binding rope. Then, they pulled him up from both sides and dragged him outside. They brought him through a long and dark tunnel. Mo Ran opened his mouth, his voice was hoarse and groggy as he spoke for the first time in days, "How are they?" No one paid him any attention. He was led to the end of the corridor where the sky was shining bright. Mo Ran was like an evil dragon that had been curled up in the dark for too long. His eyes were blinded and uneasy in such a bright light. He couldn't get used to the sudden brightness. He wanted to cover his eyes, but his hands were tied behind his back. He could only lower his head. Tears seeped out of his thick black eyelashes. His eyes and ears were muddled. He didn't know where he was. Only his sense of smell was clear. He smelled the wind, the sea of people, the flowers and trees. He was pushed, so he walked forward hesitantly. Slowly, his ears adjusted to the noise. He heard many people talking. The gathering of whispers was like a tidal wave. The tide could wash away the filth, but the tide could also drown people. Mo Ran felt that he couldn't breathe. He felt very weak. At this moment, he was extremely weak. Kneel down. His captors were pushing him. He knelt down. The sun shone brightly in the sky, shining on his haggard face. He didn't expect it to be such a sunny day outside. It's that Grand Master Mo. I didn't expect to see him being tried in public by Tianyan Pavilion. Sigh, you can't judge a book by its cover. Mo Ran's ears were buzzing. He could gradually see something, but it was still not clear. He could only use the shadow of his eyelashes to cover his eyes slightly, and as he tried to see the things in front of him. It was the public trial platform of the Tianyan Pavilion in his memory. When he was young, he had watched a public trial with Xue Zhenyang and Xue Meng. Now he had changed from a spectator to a person being persecuted in front of the public. The crowd below the stage was like a school of fish. They were ordinary people who came to Tianyan Pavilion to watch the trial. He couldn't see anyone's face clearly. He also couldn't see what kind of expression they had. He only felt that the whispering heads were gathered together like waves of wheat. Then, he looked up again. There were high platforms on the four walls. On the platforms sat guests from various sects. The green ones were from the Beaten Manor, the red ones were from the Huohuang Pavilion, and the yellow ones were from the Wuobei Temple. Then his heart suddenly clenched. It was strange that he would still feel pain. He saw familiar silver-blue ones. The quietest and the one with the most number of disciples on the entire platform. The Shi Sheng Peak. He blinked. Ignoring the piercing pain in his eyes, he tried to look in that direction. But he couldn't see. He couldn't see where Xue Zhenyang was. He couldn't see who was Xue Meng, who was Elder Tanlang, and who was Elder Suanji. He couldn't find Madame Wang. In the end, on the trial stage, he still couldn't see the people he cared about the most. From the Shi Sheng Peak sect, Mo Weiyu, the illegitimate son of Nangang Yan, the city lord of the ninth city of the Rufeng sect. On the high platform, Mu Yanli stated clearly using the sound amplification technique. Her voice resounded through the air. Therefore, he should be tried strictly. He can't be wrongly judged. Mo Ran didn't listen to her. For a person who had been confined for a long time, such a clear and sharp voice was too harsh to the ears. Mu Yanli spoke at a moderate pace for about the time it would take to drink a cup of tea. What drifted into Mo Ran's ears were bits and pieces of phrases such as a life for a life, harboring evil intentions, and cultivating a forbidden technique. In the end, he heard her say, "It's the duty of the Tianyan Pavilion to eliminate serious criminals and serve justice." After Mu Yanli finished speaking, a disciple of the Tianyan Pavilion walked over. That disciple came in front of Mo Ran. Against the dazzling sunlight, he cast a pitch-black shadow. "Open your mouth." Seeing that Mo Ran didn't respond, that person made a tisk sound. He roughly pinched his chin and poured a pot of bitter and salty medicine into his mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Mo Ran couldn't stop coughing. He hadn't eaten for many days. When his stomach suddenly came into contact with such a strong liquid, he almost vomited. That person pinched his throat and didn't let him move, forcing him to swallow the entire pot of medicine. The ice-cold liquid slid into his stomach like a snake, overturning rivers and seas, as if it was going to tear his internal organs apart. Mo Ran's face was ashen. He wanted to vomit, he really wanted to vomit. But he didn't admit defeat or beg for mercy. He didn't even want tears to fall from the corners of his eyes. For half of his life, he had lived a very lowly life, but this didn't mean that he didn't have dignity. After the medicine was finished, that person let go of him. He panted heavily. His wings were drooping and his fatigue was obvious. However, he still had the ferocity of a lone eagle on the verge of death. A person from Tianyan Pavilion explained to onlookers as per expectations, "This is a truth serum." Mo Ran's lips were pale, but he lowered his eyes and smiled. "The truth serum, truth serum. How could he not know? This kind of medicine was definitely not to be drunk by those who were innocent. Only when one became a prisoner of Tianyan Pavilion would one be forced to drink this kind of medicine. Then, they would become lightheaded and forced to recount all the crimes they had committed in their lives. After the Tianyan Pavilion disciple finished his explanation, he walked over and tapped Mo Ran's lips lightly. He used the sound amplification technique so that everyone could hear what he was going to say. Mo Ran closed his eyes and frowned. He felt as if there was a knife twisting inside his stomach. He tried to resist it, but it was too difficult. His whole body was trembling, his shackles made clinking sounds. His face was pale and the whites of his eyes were slowly rolling up. He crawled on the torture platform, spasming. He was still conscious, but his consciousness would be clear one moment only to become blurry the next. Exerting all his willpower, he tried to fight the effect of the serum, but it was no use. I have killed before. In the end, he still closed his eyes in agony and spoke hoarsely. His voice was ragged as it staggered past every corner. Everyone quieted down and countless pairs of eyes looked at the person on the platform. Mu Yanli stood on the high platform and looked down with disdain. How many people have you killed? Too many. I can't remember. The faces of the people below had changed. How old were you when you first killed? 15. Did you kill cultivators or normal people? Normal people. Did you kill for revenge or to protect yourself? Both. The question and answer went on. Many spectators had gathered to watch the show, so they weren't exactly aware of the case. When they heard that Mo Ran had killed people for revenge at the age of 15 and that he couldn't remember the exact number, they were shocked and angry. I didn't expect the famous Grandmaster Mo to be a devil who kills without batting an eyelid. So scary. This person is too sinister. When I was 15, I didn't even dare to kill a chicken, but he has already started killing people. What a monster. Mu Yanli ignored them and said coldly, state your other crimes. Mo Ran couldn't hold it in anymore. He said hoarsely, I impersonated someone. I pretended to be the nephew of the sect leader of Shi Shengpeak. How long? 8 years. State your other crimes. Mo Ran said slowly, I cultivated forbidden techniques. Zhenlong. Zhenlong, chess formation. Many people on the platform were speechless at this moment. Someone looked at the Shi Shengpeak and said sarcastically, didn't Xue Zhenyang want to exonerate this beast? I said that he would definitely tell the truth if we feed him the truth serum. Xue Zhenyang actually tried to stop Tianyan Pavilion for persecuting Mo Ran accordingly. I think this old thing is blinded by lard. He doesn't even want to avenge his nephew. The disciples at Shi Shengpeak cultivate the forbidden technique. This sect should be disbanded, right? What's the point of keeping it? To continue nurturing devils. I also said that he did it. At Shi Shengpeak when he destroyed his own spiritual core to save us. It was just a ruse. Fortunately, we didn't let him go at that time. That's right. Where there's life, there's hope. He must have thought that way. He's so powerful. So, what if his spiritual core was destroyed? Maybe he could come up with some crooked ways to save himself. It was really a close call. If the pavilion master of Tianyan Pavilion didn't insist, we might have let this vicious thing go by mistake. There was a huge scale on the public trial platform. It was flowing with golden brilliance. It was an extremely special divine weapon. It weighed hundreds of tons. Since the founding of Tianyan Pavilion, it had been standing there for thousands of years. It had been passed down from generation to generation. It was said that the scale was left behind by the gods. It could judge all the crimes and punishments in the mortal world, giving the fairest judgment. When Mo Ran started to state his crimes, Mu Yanli ordered her disciples to put the weights made of golden spiritual power into the scale. The exquisite weights fell into the scale and quickly became bigger. They pressed down heavily on the other side of the scale and towards the corresponding punishment. When he stated the first crime, the scale pointed to dig out the spiritual core alive. When he mentioned the Zhenlong chess formation, the scale pointed to the most extreme punishment: destroy the soul. On the platform, Xuemeng's face instantly turned pale. He muttered, destroy the soul. From then on, there would be no more Mo Weiyu, there would be no Mo Ran in any world. This elder brother of his, it didn't matter if it was real or pretend. Even if he reincarnated, he would never see him again. His mind became blank and his hands were numb. Xue Zhenyang stood up and said to Mu Yanli seriously, destroying the soul is a punishment that no one has ever suffered since the Tianyan Pavilion was established. Pavilion Master Mu, I'm afraid your judgment is not fair. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 271. Tianyan Pavilion. Final trial. Hearing Xue Zhenjiang's words, people from other sects got up angrily. People from Shisheng Peak should shut up. Your disciple has violated the taboo of the cultivation world by practicing the forbidden technique of Zhenlong chess formation. Logically speaking, your lousy sect should immediately disperse and get lost. Right now, we don't have time to bother with you, but you should be a little self-aware. Xue Zhenyang. You're still speaking for him? Don't tell me you're in cahoots with him. There were murmurs all around. Whether it was a sect or a family, it was often like this. If one member became a god, everyone would ascend to heaven. However, once one member did something unforgivable, the entire sect or family would be regarded as a treacherous nest of devils. This is a measure of punishment, not yet a verdict, Mu Yanli said indifferently. Sect leader Xue, don't be anxious. After the sins were measured, the merits would also be calculated. The difference between the two would be the final conclusion. After she finished speaking, she turned her head and looked at Mo Ran again. Her voice was cold. State you other crimes. I, once, deceived, my Shizun, and, destroy, ancestor. Deceived your master and destroy ancestor. These words were puzzling. Mo Ran felt like his heart was on fire. Deceived his master and destroy his ancestor. What he said was something he committed in the other life. This truth serum would actually force one to state crimes committed even in the other lives? But he didn't want to say it. He didn't want to say it. How could he say how he humiliated Chu Wanning in the other life in front of all these people? That he imprisoned him as his exclusive property and made him his concubine. That he hurt his pride and even caused his death. He didn't want to say it. He might not be able to survive this, but Chu Wanning still had a long life ahead of him. Chu Wanning was the spirit of the divine wood, possessing the purest spiritual energy and was a natural talent. He hoped that Chu Wanning could live on well. In the end, he would definitely ascend and become an immortal. He would no longer have to suffer the pain of reincarnation or love anymore. His Shizun was so good and so pure. He wanted to protect him. He couldn't let others know how involved they were. He could not let anyone think that Chu Wanning was dirty, that his body was stained with Taxian Jun's sins and blood. He had to protect him. Protect him at all cost. His abdomen seemed to be on fire and the pain was so intense as if his intestines were being cut. He could vaguely hear Mu Yanli's cold interrogation, "What do you mean by deceiving your master and destroy ancestors?" He wouldn't say it, he shouldn't say it. His fingertips were bleeding from how hard it was pressed on the rough gravel floor. His forehead was red from the scratches. He was hunched over and panting heavily, like a fish on the verge of death by the riverbank. But he didn't say anything. Fighting the effect of the truth serum is the same as fighting Tianwen. As long as one clenched their teeth, they would be able to endure it in the end. He struggled under the questioning of the Tianyan pavilion and the gazes of the crowd. He was howling like a trapped beast. This torture was too much. Ordinary people couldn't even endure Tianwen, and this was 100 or even 1,000 times more painful than Tianwen. He felt as if his innards were being squeezed by a pair of invisible hands, breaking and mincing them. The wounds on his flesh were flooded with salt water, causing a burning pain. His wrists were in excruciating pain. Mu Yanli's voice sounded so far away, as if it came from across the ocean. What do you mean by deceiving your Shizun and destroy ancestors? He remained quiet. He bit his tongue and lips. His mouth was full of blood, but he didn't cry out. It was the same as when he was locked in the dog cage for 7 days. He didn't cry. His tears would only make him a laughing stock. No one would pity him, and he didn't want their pity. Even if it hurt to death, so much so that it seemed as if his liver and innards felt as if they were being cut, he would endure it. Mu Yanli was still questioning him condescendingly. What did you do to Chu Wanning? It was too painful that he started to hallucinate. In a trance, he saw a vision of Chu Wanning when he ascended to immortality 100 years later. He was still wearing snow-white clothes. His features were handsome and his aura was magnificent. When he wasn't smiling, his eyes were sharp. When he smiled, the sharpness melted away, turning into gentleness. I didn't. Mu Yanli was stunned for a moment. Her red lips opened slightly. What? Mo Ran's throat was crushed, and his voice was extremely hoarse. It's not. I didn't deceive my Shizun. He raised his eyes. They were bloodshot, but his pupils were bright. Destroy ancestors. He bit each word. Mu Yanli did not know what kind of expression she had on her face. There seemed to be a trace of shock in them, as well as a trace of confusion. But she was too cold, so the shock and confusion quickly froze into ice. She paused for a moment and said, "Continue stating your crime." Mo Ran coughed up blood. His lungs felt as if they'd been crushed, and when he breathed, there was a turbid smell. He lay on the ground, waiting for the excruciating pain caused by the truth serum to subside. His whole body was drenched in sweat and his face was as pale as paper. His cheek was close to the ground and his hair was matted against his cheeks. He gasped for breath. Mu Yanli couldn't help but take half a step forward. She stared at him. Continue to state your crimes. No more. Mo Ran closed his eyes and said hoarsely, to declare. Mu Yanli ordered a disciple to go forward and take a little of Mo Ran's blood. Then, she smeared it on the holy weapon Tianliang. The weight was engraved with the enchanted words merit, kindness, and virtue. It was used to measure a person's merit. She threw the weight into the scale. The scale slowly floated. Except for Mo Ran, everyone was looking at the golden needle. Destroy the soul. It was still destroy the soul. The needle was moving slowly. Destroy the soul. The needle was still moving within the vicinity of destroy the soul sentence. Xuemeng held the scimitar Longcheng on his knees. The expression on his face was extremely ugly. He stared at the scale. He tried to straighten his back because he knew that if he collapsed, it would be difficult for him to stand up again. He trembled slightly. At this moment, his palm was colder than the black steel of Longcheng. Mu Yanli's beautiful eyes stared at the golden scale without blinking. The needle moved slower and slower. It moved in the area of destroy the soul and almost stopped. She flicked her sleeves and said lightly, "All right, it seems that the situation has turned. It's still moving. Young Master Xue." Xuemeng stared at her as he talked, although his voice was trembling. He didn't know whether what he did was right or wrong. The needle is still moving. Mu Yanli said, "It's about to stop." "Then let's wait for it to stop." Mu Yanli looked at him. After a while, a cold and mocking smile appeared on her face. "All right, then let's wait for it to stop." The sun was scorching hot and a layer of grey smoke rose from the sand and stone ground. They waited. Everyone looked at the needle, waiting for it to stop. But strangely enough, the needle kept moving for a long time. It seemed that it couldn't decide how to deal with Mo Weiyu. It was wavering, hesitantly leaning towards the reduced choice of punishment. It seemed that Mu Yanli had never encountered such a situation before, but she didn't say anything. Her yellow dress fluttered on the ground as she quietly waited for the holy weapon Tian Liang's judgment. Xuemeng's knuckles turned white. He stared at the needle. It seemed that what was about to be judged was not Mo Weiyu's life but the years that he and Mo Ran had known each other. From contempt to disgust, from disgust to acceptance, and from acceptance to approval. Was it wrong of him to be cold to him at the beginning? Was it wrong for him to treat him like a brother later on? He didn't know. He stared at the needle. In his vast and helpless heart, he only had hope when he stared at the needle. Don't stop. I beg you. Keep going forward. Look, there's still a little more. No matter how guilty he was, he still sacrificed his spiritual core and defeated thousands of enemies. How could he be sentenced with the utmost punishment? It couldn't be right to destroy his soul. A little more. Just a bit more. Until the end. Dig out the spiritual core. Mu Yanli announced with an expressionless face. She looked extremely just and cold-blooded, which was completely different from the golden and warm gown she was wearing. Her whole person was colder than the frost and snow. The needle stopped. The tip of the needle pointed at the words "dig out the spiritual core." That was the final judgment for Grandmaster Mo. Mu Yanli looked at the spectators below as well as the 10 great sects on the platform. It was indeed the 10 great sects. The Tianyan pavilion still kept the old seat for the Rufeng sect. There was only one person sitting there. It was Ye Wangzi, dressed in black. She was carrying Nangongxi's cloth quiver on her back. Nao Beijin, who had lost his master forever, was lying on her knees. Her face was very haggard but her eyes were clear. She was also watching everything on the platform. Mu Yanli said, "The sky has eyes and a clear mirror hangs high above. The Tianyan pavilion has been making its judgments based on merits and demerits. It has never been biased and acted maliciously for personal gains, nor has it deliberately made things difficult for the concerned party. The verdict is dig out the spiritual core and will be finalized in 3 days if no objection has been raised." After another 3 days, Xuemeng, who had been enduring with his eyes closed, finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He suddenly stood up, his silver blue light armor shining. "I have objections. There's no need to wait for 3 days. I am raising an objection now." The uproar below became louder. "Damn Shi Shengpeak, can you shut up? What the hell? Why don't we just interrogate Xue Zhenyang and Xuemeng together? In all likelihood, they're all in cahoots. How can they still speak up for this devil at this point? When the Zhenlong chess pieces appeared, how come it didn't kill many people at Shi Shengpeak? Are you really not a devil's den?" Xuemeng was so angry that his face turned ashen. However, he had no choice but to use all his strength to suppress his anger. Mu Yanli naturally heard the angry roars of those cultivators, but she turned a deaf ear to them. She only said indifferently, "Young Master Xue, what do you want to say? I'm all ears." Xuemeng opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say for a moment. Madame Wang was very worried. She quietly pulled him. "Meng Er, there are still 3 days. Let's take our time and think about how to state our objection." However, Xuemeng didn't seem to hear his mother. He stared at Mu Yanli for a while, then turned to look at the scale. Finally, his gaze landed on a small black dot in the distance. That was Mo Ran on the execution platform. Xuemeng's eyes suddenly trembled. It was as if a curtain was blown by the wind. His eyes wrinkled. It was neither dark nor bright. He said without rhyme or reason, "He doesn't have a spiritual core anymore." Mu Yanli asked, "What do you mean?" Xuemeng suddenly became agitated. He looked back at her. "What do I mean? Have you forgotten? Isn't he the one who saved you at Shisheng Peak and the one who actually stopped all those Zhenlong chess pieces? Pavilion Master Mu, I want to know how do you plan to execute his judgment? His spiritual core is already broken. What else do you want to do? Dig out his heart. His eyes were filled with tears. His fingernails dug deep into his palms. Dig out his spiritual core alive? How would you do that? He doesn't have a spiritual core anymore. Are you going to kill him? Mu Yanli narrowed her eyes. The Tianyan Pavilion has its own way. According to the rules, after the verdict is announced, the execution will be carried out in 3 days. Suddenly, a slightly hoarse voice sounded. Everyone looked up and saw that the person speaking was Ye Wangzi. Pavilion Master, please explain clearly the method you would use to carry out the judgment. Immediately, someone from Beaten Manor angrily rebuked, what right do you have to speak? Who do you think you are? Some people even whispered, just because she had Jiangxi's support and that Nangongxi's death cleared the Rufeng sect from indictments, she already thinks she's something. On such a grand occasion, how can a nameless woman question the pavilion master of the Tianyan Pavilion like this? Is she even qualified? Ye Wangzi paid no attention to all of this. Until someone who had a grudge with the Nangong family shouted at her, Ye Wangzi, Rufeng sect has already perished. You're sitting there alone. Don't tell me you think you're the sect leader of the Rufeng sect. Ye Wangzi hugged Nao Beijin, who was whimpering in her arms and hadn't recovered his spiritual power yet. She stood there alone, neither angry nor noisy. When those angry and mocking voices gradually calmed down, she said, the leader of the Rufeng sect's dark city is still alive. It is not up to you whether the Rufeng sect is finished or not. You. Ye Wangzi just ignore the other afterwards. She looked at Mu Yanli and said, Pavilion Master, please explain clearly. Mu Yanli said, in this world, there's a way to reconstruct the spiritual core. The spiritual core is broken, but the fragments are still in the heart cavity. The so-called digging out of the spiritual core naturally doesn't require the spiritual core to be intact. Xuemeng's face was as white as paper. What exactly would you do? Just cast a spell and dig out all the fragments of the spiritual core. Mu Yanli said, the Tianyan Pavilion won't take his. Before the word life could be said, Xue Zhenyang also stood up, his face dark. You would dig out all the fragments of the spiritual core. That's right. Then how many times would you dig into his chest? Xue Zhenyang glared at her. His hair had already turned white. 5 times. 10 times. Digging out the spiritual core hurts the heart. Each time would be extremely painful. A few years ago, the Heavenly Sound Pavilion dug out a prisoner's spiritual core. She didn't make it and died the same day she returned to the prison. Mu Yanli said indifferently, that's because she was weak. It's not the fault of the Tianyan Pavilion. Then you might as well take his life directly. Xue Zhenyang shouted angrily. Mu Yanli, the fragments of the spiritual core. You said that if his spiritual core is broken into 2 pieces, you'll dig twice. If it's 3 pieces, you'll dig thrice. But what if it's broken into hundreds or thousands of pieces? Are you going to cut him into pieces? You're going to cut him into pieces. If it's really broken into pieces like that, then that was his fate. Xue Zhenyang was speechless. Fate. Everything was fate. He suddenly felt that it was all ridiculous. What was fate? Because of fate, he mistakenly raised this child as his own nephew. He gave this child a family and a teacher. He gave this child a place to live and a home. But what was this child's original fate? He was an illegitimate child who didn't even have enough to eat since he was young. He followed his mother to beg and perform for a living. After his mother died, he was a thin and weak child. He dragged her gradually rotting body to the mass grave and buried the only warmth of his childhood with his own hands. He was beaten and scolded countless times. He was locked in a dog cage and framed to go to prison. Everyone hoped that the world would be fair. But from the moment of birth, fate was unfair to begin with. Why was it that on one side, the young masters of rich family led an extravagant lifestyle and can throw a fortune just for a smile from a beautiful woman, while there were desolate people who had no choice but to live on insects and ants? How come there are some who could spoil their mother rottenly, while when one could only their mother's bones to the rich and powerful to beg only to be told that you're only worth 3 feet, you can't ask for 10 feet? Why was it that some people had to be buried poorly while some people were born rich? This was unfair. When fate poured unfairness on those at the bottom, a mere price adjustment order of commodities could take away the lives of those around them. Where is the justice there? They were all living people. How could the oppressed not feel hatred? How could they be free of it? Even if this child had done wrong, even if he was not his flesh and blood, even if fate played tricks on him. When he thought of this, his heart still ached. Shui Zhenyang closed his eyes. He muttered, "It's too cruel." This holy weapon Tianliang probably didn't even take into account the situation of the broken spiritual core. Hundreds of times, Mu Yanli. He looked up and his voice was trembling. You intend to stab his heart hundreds of times. The sky has eyes and a clear mirror hangs high above. The Tianyan pavilion supposed to carry out judgment strictly, fairly, and meticulously. Shui Zhenyang raised his head and watched as the cloud slowly flowed past. He has to pay for his sins. He has to pay what he owed to this world. Shui Zhenyang suddenly choked. But what about what this world owes him? Will anyone pay him back? Who should pay him back? End chapter.